Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to InnovaBuzz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
You need to become more curious, right? You need to focus on developing your level of curiosity and just take an interest in new things. But, and this is the key part, don't get interested in new things for their own sake. The thing that makes something move from just being creative to being innovative is when you take those new things and you work on them to create actual value.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. If you haven't yet listened to my recent conversations with business strategy and marketing consultant Mike Mole and with Brendan Kumarasamy of Master Talk, then do check them out, but only after you've listened to today's conversation, of course. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Tendayi Viki. Tendayi is an author and a corporate innovation expert. He's also an associate partner at Strategyzer, where he helps companies innovate for the future while managing their core business. In our discussion today, Tendayi talked to me about why innovation project portfolio success is a much better measure than individual success. He explained the 3 types of innovation projects to include in a balanced portfolio, and he explained to me that there is no innovation without relationships. Without further ado, then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Tendayi Viki. Hi. I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited today to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast, all the way from London in the UK, Dr. Tendayi Viki. Tendayi grew up in Zimbabwe. He got his first degree there. Then he went on to Europe to become an academic at university for a while and moved to Silicon Valley working at Stanford, which is where he got into innovation. Today, he's an associate partner at Strategyzer, which is co-founded by Alexander Osterwalder, who's been on our podcast before, so big hello to Alex. And you help companies innovate for the future while managing their core business today. You're the author of 3 books, Pirates in the Navy, The Corporate Startup, and The Lean Product Lifecycle, and also a regular contributor to Forbes. So previously, Tendayi was Director of Product Lifecycle at Pearson. He co-developed an innovation framework that won the Best Innovation Program 2015 at the Corporate Entrepreneurs Awards in New York. He's been shortlisted for the Thinkers 50 Innovation Award and was named on the Thinkers 50 2018 radar list for emerging management thinkers to watch. So I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today, Tendayi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's quite a long profile. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a great privilege to have you as my guest. Now, as I said, we've previously had Alex Osterwalder, also Steve Blank and Pete Newell that you also work closely together with. So big hello to Alex, Steve and Pete, and also to Terry Vanich, who's been instrumental in organising times with each of you. And I know she listens to the podcast and is a fan.
Yes. Shout out to Terry. Hi, Terry.
Yeah. Now, you define yourself as uncomplacent, something that he thinks all innovation leaders need to be, or something you think all innovation leaders need to be. Now, Tell me, what does that mean?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? People are often advised to make hay while the sun shines. I think you've heard that before. Make hay while the sun shines. And the reason why that even became something to say at all is because making hay while the sun is shining is the hardest thing to do. Because when the sun is shining, you want to go to the beach, and like sit in a hammock, read a book, right? It's because when people have the sense that they've accomplished something or they've succeeded in life, the tendency almost automatically is to slow down and enjoy the success. And so what happens then is the moment you stop using a muscle, you lose that muscle. So if you stop using your entrepreneurial muscle as a company, you lose that muscle. If you stop losing the quest to get better as an individual, you lose that muscle. And to build it back up again becomes really difficult. And so, the idea of becoming uncomplacent really speaks to the human condition, which is a tendency towards complacency. And then it really has a big impact on how companies view themselves, right? And how they're run.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I'm curious, you started off in forensic psychology, I believe.
Yeah.
How did you do that transition to innovation and strategy around innovation?
I don't know, maybe all business people are crooks now. It was a very strange journey, right? It had no. That's why people always ask me, like when I'm like, people want me to mentor them. They say like, so what do I need to do to become like, what you became? And I'm just like, I have no idea how I became what I became in a methodical sense. What I know is that I kept following things that interested me. So I was first interested in law, but then I didn't do a law degree. I did a psychology degree because that became much more interesting for me. And then I got interested in forensic psychology because one of my first jobs was to go to a courtroom and transcribe cases for a certain professor so we could analyze the data. So that kind of drew me in. And then I came to England and I did a master's in forensic psychology from the University of Kent. But while I was doing that, I met a really great professor called Dominic Abrams, who was a social psychologist. So then I got diverged again, just sort of following my interest into the sort of general social psychology, which is where I then did my PhD. While I was doing my PhD, I had a great colleague called Stefan Gisner, who's now a professor at Rotterdam, who was into like mergers and acquisitions. So that drew me into like business psychology, creativity, all the way through to that fellowship at Stanford, which kind of emerged because I met somebody at a conference who was impressed with my work, and then they invited me to come to Stanford. And when I was at Stanford, I met somebody who invited me to Facebook, right? Where Facebook were running their first accelerator, and also to attend Steve Blank's classes because there was a lot of conversations happening there. So I was attending Steve Blank's classes, and I was going to Facebook's accelerator, and then that was it. That was another sort of divergent point. So it's almost like this chaotic willingness to follow detours and rabbit holes that become interesting for me that then navigate me to where I am today. So who knows, right? What we'll be talking about with me 10 years from now.
Yeah, well, one of the things that strikes me about what you've said there and how you've outlined your path is curiosity, that insatiable curiosity about what you experience and what might be coming up. And how important is that for innovation?
Oh, it's absolutely important for innovation. Like the moment you become uncurious, you can't become a really great innovator, right? I mean, innovation is almost like the pursuit of novelty, right? But
Yeah.
not the pursuit of novelty for novelty's sake. It's the pursuit of novelty with the ultimate goal of creating continuous value. Because what we do understand is that, things atrophy, right? So business models get old. They don't last forever. So there's always a peak and then a decline. And so if you stay consistently curious about how you can get better and how you can find new ways to create value, then that absolutely helps.
Okay. So I'm someone who lived through the transition to digital photography with one of the traditional film manufacturers back
Right.
in the early 1990s.
Right.
And having lived through that and having seen that kind of rapid decline of the film manufacturers, and we all know what happened there. But having actually experienced that firsthand, actually in the early 1980s it was, I'm dating myself a little bit now, but having experienced that firsthand, I've always been curious, how does a business find that balance between keeping their core business going and yet innovating at the edges so that they're either ahead of the game in terms of that total disruption of their business model, or at least they're in a position to pivot very quickly if that disruption happens externally?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there's one thing that I assume is true, and maybe you can tell me if it's not true. But I've often found that in very many organizations, what the people at the top of those organizations care about happens. Right. But if the CEO, and all the chief CFO and the CTO and all of those folks, if they care about something, they tend to push it through and make it happen. And so the question then becomes, to what extent do our top leaders care about balancing the exploitation of the current business and exploring new opportunities? Jeff Bezos cares about that, so it happens. Right? The CEO of Intuit, I think his name is Scott Cook. He cares about that, so it happens inside that organization. So the first thing that we do often when we're having conversations with leaders is to show them this distinction, to say there's a part of your business where you're exploiting your current success, and you have to do that because that's how you're keeping the lights on. There's the part of your business where you have to be thinking about how you're going to keep the lights on 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And you have to be building those things now so that by the time you need to sort of lean on them, they're there for you. And then we say, so let's look at your current portfolio and let's see where the bias is. And we map that with them. And 99% of the stuff that they're kind of spending most of their time with is in the exploit portfolio. And just visually showing them that makes explicit to them the choices they're making, because sometimes people are making choices, but they're implicit choices. They're sort of coming to work, and as soon as they walk in through the door, they're confronted by all these problems in the core business, and they're helping solve those problems. And then they go home, and then they come back the next day, and they do the same thing. But if we make the choices very explicit, and then we say, this is the choice you've made. Is this a choice you're comfortable with? And then the leaders can say, yeah, it's a choice I'm comfortable with because, I'm in pharma or whatever. Pharma will never get disrupted. Whatever it is that they want to say. Then we say, okay, with that leader, it's a harder conversation to then get them to implement the exploration part of their portfolio. But with the leader that says, yes, I get it. This is making me really uncomfortable. How do I get this done? Then we can say, right, well, the way to get it done is to do this, set up this thing, set up that thing. And then we start building that with them. But before there is an acceptance and an acknowledgement that an unbalanced portfolio is dangerous for the business, it's really hard to move forward with any company like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting conundrum, isn't it, with having that balanced portfolio? And I guess where I experienced it was already very late. That there wasn't that balance between. I mean, they were innovating in some aspects, but they were innovating in areas that were kind of expanding outside of their core business. And they were kind of putting their core business at risk, as it turned out, by not paying attention to what was happening with digital photography. And then when the first digital consumer camera was actually launched, it was panic stations for about 2 months. And I was on a task force that had to evaluate the first prototype and report back on it. And once we reported back and said, well, it's not actually true digital and the quality actually isn't very good. But of course, the report went on to say a lot more than that. It went on to say that this was proof of concept. Here's all the patents that are out there that indicate that they're working really heavily on improving on this whole technology. There's a whole lot of other people doing stuff in the background, big companies like this was Sony, but there's also other big companies working on this that have got lots of horsepower behind them. and we expect this would probably actually could be mainstream within 20 years. Now, as it turned out, we were wrong. It was mainstream in 10 years, but the senior management didn't read past the bit that said the quality was no good, and the conclusion was we just need to make better film.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Steve Blank has got one of my favorite quotes, right, which is disruption on day one always looks like a toy.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why large companies get disrupted. You see, if large companies would respond to the early signs of disruption in the way they're supposed to, they would never get disrupted. But the problem is that disruption always turns up looking like, what? Who would want to do this? Like, who would want to take a digital camera with a picture that's so grainy that you can't even tell what it is? Like, who would want this? Just like the same question that, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were asked, like, who are these people who would want to have a computer in their home and what would they do with it? Like, disruption always looks like it's absurd, and we would never do that. We're IBM, or we would never do that. We're Kodak or whatever, right? And so because disruption always looks like a toy, what people tend to forget is that disruption always enters at the bottom, and then over time, as the technology gets better, more and more of your customers start moving to that technology. And as more and more of your customers start moving to the technology, that's when you get disrupted, because now you don't have the capacity to respond as quickly as your disruptors were already way ahead of you.
Yeah. So how do we create an ecosystem within any business that keeps tabs on all of those toys, as you call them, that are kind of being developed out there? And I'm guessing, there's probably thousands of toys and only one or two of those might eventually turn into a real product. How do we keep tabs on those? How do we also set up an ecosystem where we've actually got people developing some toys that might serve us going forward, or might disrupt another industry, or might disrupt our own industry, which is another question, but we'll get to that one later.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing we care about, right, is the likelihood that our business model might get disrupted. So one of the assessments that we've created at Strategyzer is something we call the disruption risk assessment, which is a tool that organizations on an ongoing basis can use to assess the risk that their core business model might get disrupted by emerging technologies. And we assess various dimensions, including like internal weaknesses in the business model, but also external emerging challenges. So what that means is that, every organization must have some sort of scouting capability or an external partner that they work with who kind of just scans the world and sees what's actually happening. Lena List was a really wonderful innovator. She used to be head of innovation at Rumble, gave this really great talk where she discussed this kind of process they have for scouting what's emerging out there. And they focus on startups. And that focus is on like which areas and spaces are getting the most investment right now, with an increasing number of startups that are working on these technologies, right? And so then she's got a really nice wheel, and she shows exactly all the startups that they're tracking in terms of like which ones of those are actually emerging. And just with that kind of level of studying and tracking the data, you get a sense of where you as a company need to start sort of responding. Now, tracking by itself is useless, of course. You then need to build the response, right? And the response is really, can we build our own portfolio of things that we're playing with that are connected to the disruptors that we see emerging, that provide us a chance to respond? And so you need to build both things, and that's really what we encourage companies to do.
And how do you go about convincing, like particularly CEOs of larger companies, that it's actually worthwhile to invest in that capacity when probably 80 to 90% of the efforts of the people doing that work then will actually not give any real ROI on the bottom line directly?
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult conversation. And, Alex is a really great mentor to me. And he has convinced me that you can never convince people of anything. Like they need to already be kind of on the journey, and then they need more. So what we do is we make explicit. We have visual tools that make explicit. So let me give you an example. For example, we were once working with a large airline. So we go to this large airline, it's the global head of innovation for this large global airline. And we say to them, okay, and they're like, come and help me because I want to make sense of like all these innovation programs I have in the company, but we don't really know what's happening. So we get all these different divisions and the heads of innovation. We come together, we say, write down the top 10 innovations you're most proud of from your division. So they write down the top 10 innovations they're most proud of. Some of these are award-winning innovations. Then we say, okay, fantastic. Now, as you can see on the wall there, we have a 3-dimensional chart. It's got 3 categories in it. The first category is what we call efficiency innovation, which is just innovations to improve your current business. Then we have sustaining innovations, which are innovations where you take your current capabilities and you start building something new and interesting. And then we have transformational innovations, which are innovations where you're exploring and testing brand new value propositions and brand new business models that are distinct from your current business model. So can you please take your top 10 innovations and place each one where you think it sits? So then they start to do it. And of course, people start putting their stuff in transformational. And after they've done it, we're like, well, let's have a conversation. Is this really transformational? Is this really a new value proposition? Is it really a new business? And they're like, okay, no, it isn't. So everything starts to move back to the right. Right? So in the end, once we're done with that exercise, they look at their portfolio and they realize that 90% of their innovations are efficiency innovations with 10% sustaining and nothing in transformational. And then we say to them, okay, so there it is. This is the innovation team. Never mind the CEO or the CFO. This is what the innovators are working on. So we're like, okay, you're looking at that. That's your portfolio of innovations. To what extent are you comfortable with that? Because what we know historically is if you just keep improving your current business model, you're designing a way to more efficiently die, which is what Aristotle always says, a way to more efficiently die. So to what extent are you comfortable with this? And so it becomes a coaching tool that triggers conversations. And if people insist that they're comfortable with that, then there's nothing we can do really to try and tell them that that's a bad idea. But often we find that people are not comfortable with this and they want to do more. And then we really can start to work with them to sort of build that practice for them.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great tool to kind of visualize that the 3 types of innovation that you outlined there.
Yeah.
So I know you talk about 3 types of pirates, so that in pirates in the Navy in your book. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the metaphor there.
Yes. So the book was kind of inspired by this kind of storytelling that we have around innovation. And in the storytelling around innovation, the antagonist has always been the organization. So innovators, entrepreneurs, they are the main character, the protagonist. They're doing really well. They're the star of the movie. And the thing that they're up against is the organization. And organizations are managers, leaders, MBAs are always framed as the negative thing that you're having to get over. And all the conversations we have are about how bad these people are and how bad these organizations are. And I wanted to flip that on its head and shine a light on the innovators themselves and how bad they are. And so Pirates in the Navy is based on this concept that if you're going to be an entrepreneur inside a large organization, there is no chance that you can succeed if you don't build relationships with those very people that you're detracting.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is no innovation that ever succeeds inside a large organization without leadership support, without working with key functions, without working with sales directors, without working with the CTO. You can never succeed. So the level of authenticity that you bring to the task as an innovator will help you become much more successful. And so that's why I make this distinction between just a pirate, a typical pirate that's just roaming the high seas, robbing, looting, stealing. They're unattached to any institution, and compare that pirate to a privateer who is a pirate that's out there also doing pirate type things, but the only difference is they're attached to an institution. They've been sent by someone to do that work. And so I say to entrepreneurs, you've got the choice. You can be a pirate, but if anything you're working on is found by the company, it'll be made to walk the plank. Or you can be a privateer who spends sufficient time getting a charter to be able to do the work that they're doing. Because once they complete that work, there are people there ready and willing and waiting to take that on and scale it and apply it within the organization.
Yeah, there's so much to love about that. And it kind of, to me, it speaks to, the pirate who's in it for themselves. So it's a very selfish thing, and they want to be the hero. They want to stand out as, hey, I've got these wonderful ideas and I'm always innovating and nobody listens to me. Right. Or the privateer, who's the person that says, well, what are the issues that we need to deal with here? And who can I talk to identify opportunities, and who can I talk to build alliances to get things happening when somebody comes up with an idea?
Yeah, exactly. And Karen Krippendorf, who wrote this book, Driving Innovation from Within, really, really great book. He talks about how he gives the example. He quotes the Nike head of innovation, who kind of led the work on the fuel ban. And the quote goes something like, and this is really paraphrasing, that when you're working inside a large organization and you're trying to be an innovator, like 50% of the work is the product. The other 50% of the work is politics. So you spend a lot of time lining up the cannons, like making sure that they're all pointed in the right direction, legal, compliance, HR, make sure all of these things are all pointing, finance, right? Sales, marketing, making sure all of these functions are all pointing in the right direction, right? Because of course, if you're an innovator, some of the cannons are pointed at you. So you want to turn them around, make sure that they're pointing out into the world so that you can sort of fix, the situation. But then they say something powerful at the end of that, which is, if you succeed at lining up all of these cannons, you get this benefit of being supported by a big company. That's something that startups don't have. So if you line up the cannon and when they all go off, they go off with a really big bang, because you use the machinery of this large organization and its access to resources to sort of fast track your innovation, right? And so if the entrepreneur, the innovator, does not understand the value of that, they're always going to play this persecuted hero. A prophet is never listened to in their own land. This whole, oh, woe be me. If only people had listened to me, there would be no disruption. And it's just like, yeah, sure, but that's not really how you're supposed to sort of approach the work.
Okay, so how can small business and startups, as you say, take, or what lessons can they learn from what you're saying there in terms of getting resources behind them to bring some ideas or what they see as innovations to fruition?
When you say small businesses, you mean like non-Fortune 500 companies?
Yeah.
Like me,
somebody that doesn't have a huge kind of resource and doesn't have all those cannons to line up. So they've got something, there's an idea there, or there may be even a prototype there for an industry, but it's the breakthrough, getting that breakthrough.
Yeah. So if you're a startup, you're a startup, right? Like you have to deal with all the things that a startup has to deal with. You've got this one idea, you have to test it. I often say that for the startup, their one idea is like the most important thing in the world. For the venture capitalist that's investing in them, they're just like a small part of the portfolio, so they can fail.
Yeah.
So the math is a little different, which is why we say to large companies, invest in a portfolio of ideas so you can find one successful one. So if you're a startup, you have to engage in deliberate testing and validating of your business model, iterating, etc. It's kind of lean startup, lean startup 101 there. If you're a small company that's already got something successful that's working, and now you're thinking about, if there are other things that we can do, then I would just say start small, right? Rather than try and go, because if you're a small company and you already have something that's working, you may not have big cannons, but you have cannons. And so you can leverage the small cannons you have to kind of drive innovation. So just start small, right? Whereas a large company could invest in 50 ideas, maybe you can invest in 5. But at least the fact that you've kind of started and you're kind of making small bets and slowly testing those and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Just in that kind of process, you'll find 1 or 2 things that can help your company grow and sustain itself into the future.
Yeah. And what's your view on failure in terms of, testing out these new things? So do you see companies afraid of failure or being failure averse? And how do you, I'm assuming you're going to say yes to this. So how do you address that issue or kind of change your mindset around that?
Yeah. So what is it about failure that makes people afraid? Right. The thing about failure that makes people afraid, especially if you're working on a large company, is that it's career suicide. Right.
Mm.
If your project fails or your idea fails, it's a reputational risk and a reputational damage on you. If you're a leader that's put an investment in a team and then that team fails, that's a reputational risk on you. So the question is, how do we lower that reputational risk within an organization? And the way we lower the reputational risk is to say to leaders, don't ever think of innovation as succeeding on a one by one project basis. You have to think about it as a portfolio. And what we care about is the success of the portfolio, not the success of any individual idea in the portfolio. Individual ideas in the portfolio can fail, but the portfolio itself can actually succeed. So portfolio success is the metric for leaders investing in innovation. And then the second thing that really makes leaders unwilling to accept failure is when they make huge bets, right? So teams come asking for investment and then they get 2 million, 3 million. And I often say to teams, the moment your boss gives you 3 million, they didn't just give you money, they also gave you their reputation. And so now you can't. And so we say to companies and we say to teams, don't ask for 3 million. Ask your company to make a small bet and promise that on the basis of that small bet, you'll be able to give them information that they can then use to decide if they should bet some more. Right. And now we've kind of built this relationship between size of investment and learning. And then if it's like $10,000 and we decide to stop, like who cares? Like if PwC came to a Fortune 500 company and $10,000 was missing, they were just like, it's a rounding off error. Nobody cares. It's not the kind of money that even a leader can lose their reputation over. So you want to kind of put all those things in place that allow you to feel safe while you're failing.
Yeah. So it's about doing small experiments then as well, right?
Yeah.
So gathering that data, because the small investment is a small experiment, and getting out to test phase very quickly and very early with a small prototype.
Exactly. Cheap, fast, learn, shut it down if it's not working. Cheap, fast, learn, scale it if it is. And in that process, the fear goes away because we know we're kind of just seeing if something is going to work or not. Let's see. That's really the attitude that you want to take. Yeah.
And I think that philosophy applies whether it's a big company or a small company. It's just the dollar amount invested or the time invested is a different scale.
Yeah, it applies even to a startup. Should we go with this customer segment or that one? Should we go with this channel or that one? Right? You can test all those things quickly and make decisions cheaply. Yeah.
Right, I love it. Well, this is fascinating, Tendayi. I love the approach, and I could go on talking innovation for ages, particularly based on my experience that I shared earlier. But I keep thinking back to those times, but I think I probably need to let go of that experience because it was a pretty traumatic time. But
let it go. Let it go.
Yeah, I've fully embraced the digital photography now as a hobby photographer, so it's all good. I think it's a good time to move on though to the buzz, which is, we call it our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some insightful answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome as a result. So first question, very relevant. What's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
You need to become more curious, right? You need to focus on developing your level of curiosity and just take an interest in new things. But, and this is the key part, don't get interested in new things for their own sake. The thing that makes something move from just being creative to being innovative is when you take those new things and you work on them to create actual value.
Yeah, I think I love that, create something of value out of that innovation. I mean, that's a message that comes across through all of your books and all of your writing and the presentations that I've watched. So yeah, very important point. Okay, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
So the best thing I've done to develop nowadays is read. I'm just an avid reader. Like I'm a former academic. So
Yeah.
reading, expanding my mind, reading in areas and fields that have nothing to do with the work that I do, trying to see if we can take some of those concepts and apply them to my work. Of course, the busier I get, the less time I get to read, but I find that the more I read, the better I get at my craft.
Hmm. So you read a lot of things outside of your own area, and you connecting the dots is really important then.
Yeah, connecting the dots becomes really important, and because that's what I remember when I did research on creativity and what drives creativity, and there was really great work by William Maddox about how cross-cultural experiences increase your level of creativity, and it was just because you do this cognitive expansion where you're able to bring more things to bear on your thinking, and that allows you to sort of see patterns and recognize connections where others can't see them.
Yeah, I love it. What's a favorite resource that you use most often?
My iPad. I'm like
Yeah.
wedded to my iPad. Like it's always with me. Like, I use it to do presentations and keynotes. I use it to take notes. I use it to. It's the one resource that I use a lot. Is my iPad with the pen. Now that it comes with the pen, it's just
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and you have all the books available on there
All
as
the
well?
books are on my iPad as well. Articles I'm reading. Note, it's just everything is there. Yeah.
Yeah.
You stole my iPad. You've stolen my life.
Do you prefer reading or do you listen to audiobooks?
I prefer reading. I'm not.
Hmm.
I listen to podcasts, but not audiobooks. Yeah,
Okay.
I prefer
All
reading
right.
because when I read, I'm a doodler, so that's how I make the.
Okay. Yeah.
So I like doodling and taking notes and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I find I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I find that's something I do while I'm doing some physical work or
Mm.
physical exercise. And I think that's really good use of my time in that sense. But then often I find I think, oh, I have to remember that bit or that particular thing was articulated really well. I have to go and find that in the physical book then and make a note of that because of the way it was expressed. I really like the way it was expressed, or I want to remember the things that they've said. So I always find myself having to go back and then find the physical book or the digital printed book
Mm.
and highlight those things.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
Um. So this one is one. It's actually I love that question. The one thing that we've kind of forgotten, or I've seen ignored in businesses a lot, is to put cadences and rituals that keep us on track. So the cool thing about Agile, the practices of Agile, is that they built in these rituals of like daily stand up, demo, retro, right? Weekly sprint, whatever it is, right? Those things are really how you stay on track. Because if you neglect those rituals and start treating them like as if they're a pain, what you find is that you start to get misalignment in the work that teams are doing. And so the more we can stick with those rituals and really use them for what they're supposed to be for, the better value we get. So that's the best way that I've found to keep clients and projects on track. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I'm a big fan of James Clear's Atomic Habits books, and that kind of speaks to that. Small things can have a huge impact, and they're habits that you just keep doing those small things.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
All right. And what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
So that's interesting because my answer to that, I don't know whether my answer to that would lead to differentiation. So I think that whatever it is that you're interested in, you have to become really, really good at it. So one of my favorite books is Cal Newport's So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Mm.
And it's just, and that book just talks about like mastery, right? You need to master your craft. Whatever it is you choose to do, just be so good that they can't ignore you. And always lead with mastery and always lead with craft. Even if it's knowledge work, like become really great at something. And that choice to become great at something I find the best way to sort of stand out and differentiate yourself, right? Because a lot of people are much more like the world is a tendency towards mediocrity. Like people are like happy to coast, and so the more you can kind of distinguish yourself from that, the better you can become.
And part of that is kind of being really clear about what it is that you want to master and perhaps even specialize. Because I think one of the issues that you mentioned that world's becoming really good at mediocrity is that people try to do too much and two different things and unrelated things. And I think that it's great to do a whole lot of things, but you can't necessarily be the expert who is helping other people or who makes a business out of all those different things, right?
Yeah, there's this whole concept of T-shaped individuals. I like that concept a lot because what it does is it gives a chance for both things to happen. So you choose something that you're going to go deep at, which is the straight line of your T, and then you go for the horizontal line, which is the other stuff you dabble in that just helps you get better at the thing that you're going deep. But you need mastery in something. There's value in being a master at something, even though you're like dabbling in other things. So.
Yeah, great. Interesting model, the T-shaped model. I'll have to remember that one. Okay, well, thanks, Tendayi. This has been really fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about you, find out about your books, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Yeah, my website, right? Maybe you can share it in your links, in your notes, whatever. www.tendayiviki.com. That's where like all things that I do are to be found. Yeah.
Okay, and we certainly will share that in the show notes so people can click straight through.
Cool.
All right. Well, do you have any parting advice for our listener today?
No, not really. No more parting advice. I think they've heard enough from me. You're so good they can't ignore you. That's my parting advice.
Okay, that's really good advice. Yeah, be so good you can't be ignored. Yeah. All right. And finally, who else should I get on this show and why?
I think you might want to. Have you ever had Cal Newport on your show?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, well, there it is. Get Cal Newport, the author of So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so do you have a connection to him? Do you know him?
No, I'm just a fan.
Oh, that's all right. Well, I've started accepting that people recommend others that they don't know personally but admire their work. So I'm working out some ways that we can then reach out to those people and let them know that, hey, there's two people that have had this conversation that's about to be published and we're big fans, and we'd love to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, because I'd love to, the whole conversation around mastery and getting good is, that's a really interesting conversation to have, especially for innovators.
All right. Well, we'll reach out to Cal and see if we can bring him on the show. So thanks for that recommendation.
Thank you.
And thanks for your time and sharing your insights so generously today. I've loved talking about innovation and exploring the whole idea of balancing that innovative portfolio together with maintaining your core business as well, and all the challenges that brings with it. So thanks for all of that, and please stay in touch and all the best for the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure for me to be here. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and really informative conversation with Tendayi and took something away from his episode. Curiosity combined with creating value and relationships as a formula for innovation. That was my takeaway from today's episode. I'd love to know what you took away from Tendayi's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Tendayi Viki. That is TENDAYIVIKI. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Tendayi Viki. You'll also find contact information there for getting in touch with Tendayi, as well as links to his website, his books, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in today's conversation. If you liked this episode, then please share it with 2 other people that it might help. And tag me in on that share so that I can reach out to you with a special surprise as a thank you. Tendayi suggested that we have a conversation with Cal Newport, author of So Good They Can't Ignore You, and he's also author of Deep Work, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Cal, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Tendayi Viki. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got yet more fantastic guests lined up, including Brooke Salas of B Squared Media and Danny May of Lingmo. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to InnovaBuzz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.